The weight of exhaustion settled over me as the evening carried on. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, but my mind remained elsewhere. Something gnawed at me, an unease I couldn't name. Claire stood across the room, laughing softly at something Daniel had said. Her hand lingered on his arm just a second too long. Daniel, Matthew's father, a respected businessman, charming and well-spoken. Our families had grown close over the past year, sharing meals, attending gatherings, preparing for this wedding together. I had always trusted him, but now, watching the way Claire's fingers grazed his sleeve, I felt a prickle of something uncomfortable. I pushed it aside, overthinking. That was all. Claire turned then, meeting my gaze, and for a fraction of a second something flickered in her expression. Guilt, surprise. But just as quickly she smiled, her practiced ease returning as she excused herself from Daniel's side and approached me. "Tired?" she asked, looping an arm around mine. "A little." I forced a chuckle. "It's been a long day." She leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. "One more night, and it'll all be worth it." Her lips lingered just enough to make me forget my suspicions, at least for the moment. I nodded, allowing her warmth to settle over me. As the last of the guests trickled out, I watched Olivia disappear upstairs, humming to herself. My little girl about to embark on a new journey. Pride swelled in my chest. She deserved every happiness in the world. Claire stood by the staircase, arms crossed, her gaze distant. "I'm going to take a quick walk before bed," she said. I frowned. "Now?" She nodded. "Just need some air. Everything's been so hectic." "Want me to come with you?" Her hesitation was brief, but noticeable. "No, it's fine. I won't be long." Something didn't sit right, but I didn't argue. Instead, I watched her slip out the front door, disappearing into the night. Minutes passed, then 20, then 30. I sat in the dimly lit living room, swirling a glass of whiskey, my unease growing with each tick of the clock. Where had she gone? Then movement outside, headlights flashing as a car pulled into the driveway. Claire stepped out hurriedly, smoothing down her dress before closing the door behind her. I stood, my pulse thrumming. "Where were you?" She froze for a split second before recovering. "I just needed a drive to clear my mind." "At this hour?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Ethan, I don't need an interrogation. Can we just go to bed?" Her defensiveness only sharpened my suspicions, but I let it drop. For now. She walked past me, heading upstairs without another word. I remained standing in the quiet room, fingers gripping my glass. Something wasn't right, and tomorrow I was going to find out exactly what. The house felt colder than before. Silence wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. Claire had gone upstairs, but I couldn't move. My mind replayed the moment in the study, her fingers trailing over Daniel's chest, their hushed whispers, the stolen kiss. I needed air. Stepping outside, I let the crisp night breeze wash over me. The stars blinked overhead, indifferent to the chaos unraveling within me. My fingers curled into fists as I stared at the empty driveway. Had they met somewhere before this? Was this the first time, or had I been blind for years? A rustling sound from behind made me tense. I turned sharply. Claire stood at the door, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing out here?" she asked softly. I exhaled, forcing my voice to stay even. "Just thinking." She studied me for a moment, then took a step closer. "Ethan, are you okay?" Was I okay? The question made me want to laugh. Instead, I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind with the wedding tomorrow." She nodded, but something flickered in her eyes. Relief, maybe. She thought I suspected nothing. She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Come to bed." I hesitated. The weight of what I had seen pressed against my ribs, but now wasn't the time. I needed to be careful. Finally, I nodded. Yeah, let's go. Lying beside her that night was torture. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine, but it was nothing more than an illusion. I wasn't holding the woman I thought I knew. I was lying beside a stranger. Sleep never came. I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, wondering how long she had been deceiving me. By dawn, I had made my decision. If Claire and Daniel thought they could play me for a fool, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The morning of Olivia's wedding arrived with golden sunlight pouring through the windows. Claire moved around the room effortlessly, humming as she adjusted her earrings, her face glowing with excitement. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought she was the perfect wife, the devoted mother. "Are you ready?" she asked, turning to face me. I forced a smile. More than ever. She kissed my cheek before heading downstairs, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I waited until she was gone before pulling out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen before I made the call. "Rebecca," I said when the line connected. Daniel's wife sounded groggy. "Ethan? Everything okay? Meet me at the church early. There's something you need to know." A pause, then a quiet, cautious, "All right." I hung up, my pulse steady. Claire thought she had everything under control, but she had no idea what was coming. I arrived at the church earlier than anyone else, save for the decorators and staff preparing for the ceremony. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colors across the pews, but the beauty of the scene did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest. Rebecca showed up moments later, stepping cautiously through the grand doors. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her dark eyes sharp with curiosity. "You sounded serious on the phone," she said, lowering her sunglasses. "What's going on?" I exhaled, gripping the back of a pew. "It's about Daniel and Claire." Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture stiffened. "Go on." I pulled my phone from my pocket, swiping to the photos I had taken the night before. They weren't as damning as I would have liked. Blurry images from a distance, Claire's hand on Daniel's chest, their lips nearly touching. But I had a feeling Rebecca didn't need much convincing. She took the phone from me, her jaw tightening as she studied the images. "When did this happen?" "Last night. And I have a feeling it wasn't the first time." Rebecca let out a sharp breath, turning away as she ran a hand through her dark curls. "I knew something was off," she muttered. "He's been different these past few months, secretive. I should have seen this coming." Silence stretched between us. She turned back to me, fire in her gaze. "What are you planning to do?" I met her eyes, my voice steady. "Ruin them." By the time guests began to arrive, the plan was in motion. I stood near the altar, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, but my mind remained sharp, focused. Rebecca played her part beautifully, smiling at Daniel as though nothing was amiss, greeting Claire with the warmth of an old friend. Claire, for her part, was radiant. She floated through the room with effortless grace, basking in the joy of the occasion. If she had any idea what was coming, she showed no signs of it. And then the ceremony began. Olivia stood at the back of the church, breathtaking in her gown, her father-in-law-to-be standing proudly beside her. The music swelled, the guests rose, and all eyes turned toward her. Except mine. I was watching Claire. Her fingers were entwined with mine, her smile soft as she glanced up at me, but her other hand, the one resting at her side, twitched slightly. A subtle, nervous movement. Had she noticed something was off? I leaned in slightly, my voice a whisper only she could hear. "I can't wait for you to see what's coming next." She blinked up at me, confused. "What?" But I only smiled, because in just a few short moments her world was about to crumble. The moment had arrived. Every piece of the puzzle was in place. The church doors closed behind Olivia as she made her way down the aisle, bathed in the glow of the afternoon light. Guests smiled, their eyes misty with emotion. My daughter looked stunning, her happiness undeniable. And yet, despite the beauty of the moment, my focus remained on Claire and Daniel. Rebecca shifted in her seat beside Daniel, gripping her phone tightly. I knew what she was about to do. The evidence had been gathered, every detail lined up perfectly. The betrayal that had festered in the shadows for so long was about to be dragged into the light. Claire squeezed my hand, her touch warm, comforting, a lie wrapped in silk. I let her hold on, let her think everything was normal. But as the officiant spoke, as Olivia's voice rang out, promising herself to the man she loved, I turned slightly, locking eyes with Rebecca. She nodded. Showtime. A soft chime echoed through the silent church. Then another. Guests shifted uncomfortably as the sound grew, phones vibrating in purses, pockets, and hands. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Confusion. Unease. Claire stiffened beside me. "What's going on?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Daniel yanked his phone from his pocket, his face paling as he read the message flashing on the screen. A second later, Rebecca stood, her voice slicing through the ceremony like a blade. "You might want to pause for a moment, Pastor," she said, stepping into the aisle. Every eye turned to her. "I think we all deserve to know the truth before vows are exchanged." Claire's fingers slipped from mine. "What are you doing?" Daniel hissed, his voice low and panicked. Rebecca lifted her phone, tapping the screen. A second later, every single person in the church received the same message. I had ensured it. Images filled their screens, Claire and Daniel in a dimly lit room, her lips pressed to his neck, his hands gripping her waist. A collection of texts followed, passionate words exchanged between them, declarations of lust and secrecy. It was undeniable. Gasps filled the room, whispers turned to horrified exclamations. Olivia turned, confusion etched on her beautiful face. "Mom!" Her voice trembled. Claire shot up from her seat. "Ethan," she breathed, eyes wide. "What did you do?" I finally looked at her, letting the weight of her betrayal settle between us. "I exposed the truth." Daniel staggered to his feet, fury and desperation battling in his expression. "Rebecca, let's talk about this." She turned on him, her voice icy. "Talk? After months of sneaking around with her?" The officiant cleared his throat, glancing at Olivia and Matthew. "Perhaps we should take a moment?" "No." Olivia's voice rang out, strong despite the tears in her eyes. "I want to know everything." Claire reached for her, pleading. "Sweetheart, please, I can explain." But Olivia stepped back, her face crumpling. "How could you?" Claire's perfect facade shattered. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. "Ethan," she turned to me again, desperation in her tone. I didn't mean for this to happen." I stared at her for a long moment, my voice calm when I finally spoke. "But it did." Silence, heavy, overwhelming. Then Rebecca laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "I suppose congratulations are in order. You managed to destroy two families at once." Daniel reached for her, but she yanked away. "I want a divorce," she spat. Claire turned back to me, her face stricken. "Ethan, please." I stood, straightening my suit. We're done." I turned to Olivia, pain cutting through me as I saw the devastation in her eyes. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." She swallowed hard but nodded. "She did this. Not you." Claire collapsed into the pew, her perfect world crumbling around her. Daniel looked lost, destroyed. Rebecca walked away, her steps firm, unwavering. And me? I walked out of that church knowing I had done exactly what needed to be done. Claire had played her game, but I had made sure she lost everything.